My son said, "I'll call you back, Dad." My daughter said, "I'm already on my way." He never called back. I want you to hold on to those two sentences while I tell you everything that happened, because by the time I'm done, you'll understand exactly what I mean when I say that money doesn't show you who people are. Crisis does. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Dayton, Ohio, and 8 months ago I was lying on a hospital gurney being told that my heart had a blockage so severe that if I didn't have surgery within the week, I probably wouldn't make it to the following month. The cardiologist was a small, serious woman with wire-rimmed glasses, and she didn't sugarcoat a single word. She said the procedure itself was routine for her team, that they performed it regularly, and that my chances of a full recovery were good. Then she slid a paper across the desk toward me. The out-of-pocket copay was $3,200. I want you to really sit with that number for a moment. $3,200. For some people, that's a vacation. For some people, that's a new couch. For me, sitting there in that hospital gown with a paper bracelet on my wrist and the sound of machines beeping somewhere down the hall, $3,200 was everything I had in my checking account. And then some. My savings had been wiped out 2 years earlier when I had a smaller cardiac event and spent 11 days in the hospital. I'd rebuilt slowly since then, working part-time at a hardware store because my body wouldn't let me do the warehouse job I'd had for 22 years. I had $1,900 to my name. I was $1,300 short of staying alive. I didn't panic. I want you to know that. I've been through enough in 63 years to know that panicking in a hospital doesn't help anyone. I sat up straight, folded the paper carefully, and asked the nurse if I could have a few minutes alone. She nodded and pulled the curtain. Then I called my son. He's 38 years old. He runs a commercial real estate firm in Atlanta that he built from the ground up starting about 10 years ago. And I won't pretend I wasn't proud of him for it, because I was. I helped him. Not financially, I never had that kind of money, but I drove him to his first client meetings when his car broke down. I co-signed his first office lease when no bank would touch him. I showed up every time he called, and in those early years, he called a lot. By the time he stopped calling, the firm had 12 employees and a portfolio that he told me once, almost in passing, was valued at just under $8 million. He answered on the third ring. I told him where I was. I told him what the doctor said. I told him about the surgery and the copay and the $1,900. I kept my voice steady. I didn't ask for sympathy. I just told him the facts, the way I would tell anyone the facts, because that's the kind of man I was raised to be. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Dad, I hear you. I do. But the thing is, we're right in the middle of closing on a property deal, and all our liquid cash is tied up in escrow right now. The timing is just really bad." I said, "I understand timing can be difficult." He said, "It's not that I don't want to help. You know that." I said, "I know." He said, "Let me talk to my wife and I'll call you back this afternoon, okay? Don't stress. You're going to be fine." I said, "Okay." I thanked him. I hung up. He never called back. Not that afternoon. Not that evening. Not the next morning when I called the cardiologist's office to ask about a payment plan and was told that the facility required at least 50% of the copay up front before scheduling the procedure. Not the day after that when I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and went through every number I had, trying to find $1,300 that simply didn't exist. I want to be honest with you about something. In those 2 days of silence from my son, I did not cry. I did not rage. I sat very quietly in my house, and I thought about the 22 years I spent in that warehouse so that he could go to school and not worry about money. I thought about the co-signed lease. I thought about every Sunday I drove to Atlanta and helped him paint his first office because he couldn't afford to hire anyone. I thought about all of it, and then I put it away, because dwelling on it wouldn't get me to $1,300. What got me to $1,300 was my daughter. She's 31 years old. She teaches second grade at an elementary school in Columbus, about an hour and a half from Dayton. She drives a 2014 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and a heating system that works maybe 60% of the time. She has student loans, She sends me a card on my birthday every single year without fail, always handwritten, always with something specific in it, a memory, a joke we share, something that tells me she actually sat down and thought about what to write. Last Christmas, she couldn't afford to fly home, so she drove through a snowstorm at 11 o'clock at night and showed up at my door at 2 in the morning with a foil pan of lasagna she'd made before she left. That is who she is. I called her on the second day. I almost didn't. I knew what she made. I knew what her loan payments were. I knew she was saving for a down payment on a house. And I knew how long it had taken her to get even a small amount set aside. I called her anyway, because I was running out of time and I was running out of options, and because somewhere underneath all the practicality, I needed to hear her voice. I told her everything. All of it, the blockage, the surgery, the $3,200, the $1,900 I had, the $1,300 I needed, and the silence from her brother that had now stretched past 48 hours. She didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear her breathing. Then she said, "Dad, stop talking. I'm already on my way." I said, "Sweetheart, I'm not asking you for." She said, "I know you're not asking. I'm telling you I'm coming." 3 hours later, she was at my kitchen table. She had a canvas tote bag over her shoulder, and her coat was still on, and her hair was still half wet from what I assumed was a shower she'd taken right before she got in the car. She reached into the tote bag, and she pulled out an envelope, and she set it on the table between us. I didn't touch it right away. I looked at her instead. She looked tired. She looked like she'd been running numbers in her head for the entire drive from Columbus. But she also looked at me the way she's looked at me since she was about 7 years old, which is with this particular kind of steady, no-nonsense love that has never once asked anything in return. I picked up the envelope. Inside was $1,340. Some of it was a check. Some of it was cash. Some of the cash was in small bills, the kind you get when you empty out whatever's in your wallet. I asked her where it came from. She told me. She had emptied her car fund savings account $820 that she had been putting aside for 4 months. She had borrowed $200 from her colleague at school, a woman she's friends with, who she told me gave it without hesitation. She had $220 more from her own checking account, which, she told me matter-of-factly, left her with about $60 until payday. I could not speak for a moment. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers and said, "Dad, you put me through school. You kept the lights on when things were hard. You showed up. This is the least I can do. Please just let me do it." I called the cardiologist's office the next morning. I had the full $3,200. I scheduled the surgery for 4 days later. My son called the day before the procedure. Not to bring money. Not to drive up from Atlanta. He called to tell me he'd been thinking about it, and he was sorry for the delay, and that he wanted me to know he was rooting for me. He said his wife sent her love. He said he'd try to come visit once I was recovered. I thanked him. I kept my voice even. I said I appreciated the call. After I hung up, I sat for a long time in my living room in the house where I raised both of my children. I looked at the wall where there are still 2 picture hooks from when my daughter's school photos used to hang there, the ones I took down and gave to her when she got her first apartment. I looked at the corner where my son used to build elaborate structures out of cardboard boxes when he was 8 years old, spending entire Saturdays on them, and I remember thinking then that he had the kind of focused, ambitious mind that would take him far. I was right. It did. I just didn't know then what it would cost. The surgery went well. The cardiologist told me afterward that the blockage had been worse than the imaging showed and that waiting even another week would have been genuinely dangerous. I spent 2 nights in the hospital, and then I came home, and my daughter was there. She had taken personal days from school. She had stocked my refrigerator, made a week's worth of meals, organized my medications on the counter with little handwritten labels so I wouldn't confuse them. She slept on my couch for 4 nights to make sure I was okay. Her brother sent a get well card. It arrived 6 days after I got home. The handwriting inside was generic, the kind of thing you write when you haven't thought about what to write. I put it on the counter and I did not throw it away, because he is still my son, and whatever has happened between us, that is still true. But something had changed in me. And I want to try to explain what that was because I think it's important. It wasn't anger. I need you to understand that. I've seen what anger does to a person over time, and I've watched other men my age let it hollow them out. And I decided a long time ago that I would not be one of those men. What happened inside me was quieter than anger. It was more like a door closing, not slamming, not locked from the outside, just gently, firmly, clicking shut. I had a will. I'd written it years ago with a lawyer downtown, back when I still had the warehouse job and felt like I needed to have these things in order. The house was split evenly between both children. The small investment account I'd managed to build over the years, about $47,000. Nothing remarkable, but something was also split evenly. There was a piece of land outside of town, about 12 acres my father left me, that I had never done anything with but had also never sold. A local developer had contacted me twice in the past 3 years about purchasing it. I'd ignored both letters because I wasn't ready to think about it. I called the lawyer about 2 months after my surgery, once I was fully recovered and back at the hardware store part-time. I sat across from him and I explained what I wanted to change and why, in plain, simple terms, without drama and without bitterness. He listened. He asked a few clarifying questions. Then he drafted new documents. My daughter receives the house outright. She receives the full investment account. She receives the 12 acres of land. I had a separate conversation with her about the land a few weeks later. I told her that she should get it appraised and that she should know the developer's interest in it had not gone away. She didn't know about the land. Her eyes went wide. The assessed value, based on what the developer had last offered, was $212,000. She sat very still for a moment. Then she looked at me and said, quietly, "Dad, you don't have to do this." I said, "I know I don't have to." She said, "What about?" And she stopped. I said, "Your brother is doing very well. He will continue to do very well. He has everything he needs." She nodded slowly. She didn't argue. She is not the kind of person who argues when someone makes a decision for good reasons that they have thought through carefully. I want to tell you something else. Something I've been turning over in my mind since all of this happened. I never told my son about the will. I have not told him that anything has changed. I have not called him to explain or justify, or give him the opportunity to apologize his way back into something he walked away from. He still calls on holidays, still sends occasional texts, still operates under the assumption that things between us are essentially what they have always been. I let him believe that. Not out of cruelty, not as a trap, but because I realized something important during those 2 days, when I sat in my house with $1,300 I didn't have, and a phone that didn't ring. The time to be my father's son was then. That was the moment. And he missed it. Some moments don't come back around. I go to cardiac rehabilitation twice a week now. A program at the hospital, where a group of us walk on treadmills and do light resistance work and talk sometimes with the nurses about how to protect what we have left. There are other men my age in that room. Men who have been through similar things, and we don't talk much to each other. That's not really how men my age were raised, but sometimes I catch one of them looking at the ceiling or out the window during a rest period, and I wonder what they're counting, what they're measuring, what they've decided. My daughter calls me every Sunday. She called before too, of course, but there's something different in it now. Or maybe I'm just listening differently. We talk about her students. We talk about the old Honda and whether it's time to finally let it go. We talk about nothing important sometimes, just talking. And I've learned that nothing important is often the most important thing of all. She came down last month on a Saturday and we raked leaves together in the backyard. The yard isn't big. It took us maybe 45 minutes, but we stayed outside for 2 hours anyway, sitting on the back steps with coffee afterward. And she told me about a student in her class who reminded her of herself at that age, a quiet girl who reads constantly and is a little bit invisible to everyone except the people who pay attention. I told her that the people who pay attention are the only ones worth having around. She smiled at that. She leaned her head against my shoulder for a moment, the way she used to when she was small, and we sat there while the leaves we'd just raked scattered a little in the wind. I didn't mind. We'd rake them again. I've been thinking lately about what I would say to my son if we ever had the real conversation, the one where neither of us is pretending. I've rehearsed it a few times in my head, not to prepare for a fight, but just to understand what I actually think. And what I've come to is this. I don't hate you. I don't wish you harm. I hope your business continues to do well, and that your family is healthy, and that you live a long life. But I learned something about you the day I called from that hospital. And what I learned is that there is a version of you that I raised, and a version of you that you became. And somewhere along the way, those two versions stopped being the same person. The one I raised would not have let the phone go silent for 2 days while his father was $1,300 short of heart surgery. The one I raised would have driven through the night if he had to. I know this because I watched you be that person for the first 20 years of your life. I know what you are capable of. That's what makes it what it is. I am not angry at you. I am just finished pretending that what happened didn't happen. The hardware store where I work part-time is owned by a man named Gerald who is 71 and has no intention of retiring. We have a good arrangement. I come in 3 mornings a week. I help customers find what they're looking for, and I go home in the early afternoon before my energy runs out. Gerald pays me fairly. He never asks me to lift anything heavy. He checks in on me in a way that he would never call checking in on me, just stopping by my section occasionally with some reason to talk that isn't really the reason. Some people show up. That's what I've learned. Some people, when the moment comes, show up, and some people go quiet. And all the explaining in the world, the timing, the escrow, the deal that couldn't wait, doesn't change what the silence tells you. My daughter is getting the land appraised next spring. I told her there's no rush. She said she knows, but she wants to understand what she has. That's her. She wants to understand what she has. She always has. When she was 16, and I told her that I couldn't afford to pay for college and that she'd have to apply for financial aid and scholarships, she sat down and made a list. Just made a list. What she needed to apply for, what the deadlines were, what the requirements were. She went through it methodically, and she got herself through school on grants and loans and 3 part-time jobs, and she has never once said to me, not once, not in a hard moment, not even in passing, that I should have done more. I should have done more. I know that, but she never said it. That is the difference between the two of them, and I've stopped trying to explain it through how I raised them, because I raised them in the same house with the same values and the same limitations. Character isn't just what you're taught. It's what you choose, quietly, every day, in the moments when no one is looking and nothing is required of you. The surgery was 8 months ago. My heart is doing well. The doctor says I have a good 10 or 15 years of reasonable health ahead of me if I take care of myself, which I intend to do. I take my medications. I do my rehabilitation exercises. I sleep more than I used to. I've stopped eating the things that don't serve me, in more ways than one. My son texted me last week. He said he was thinking of coming up sometime before the holidays. I told him that would be nice. I meant it, in the way that I mean things I say without any particular weight behind them anymore. My daughter is coming this weekend. She's bringing the lasagna again because I told her once that it was the best thing I'd eaten in years, and she has taken that seriously. She'll probably stay 2 nights and sleep on the couch, even though I keep telling her she should take the bed, and I'll probably let her argue me into it even though it's my house. Because sometimes the people who love you get to win the small things. I have a good life. It is smaller than the life I imagined when I was young, but I have come to believe that smaller isn't the same as lesser. The people who matter are close. The people who don't have shown me who they are. The land is there. The will is filed. The door has closed quietly and completely, without drama, without a scene, without anything that looks from the outside like what it is. Some things don't need to be announced. They just need to be true. If you've watched this far, I think you already know why. I think you've sat somewhere, in a car or a kitchen or a hospital waiting room, and you've understood what it means when someone doesn't show up. I think you know the difference between the people who come through the door and the people who let the phone ring out. I think you've been counting something too, and I think you already know what you've decided. You don't have to explain it to anyone. Just let it be true.